Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with Superlative Podcast. My guest today is Andrew Perez. He is the founder of Astor and Banks watches. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Ariel. Pleasure to be here.
So Astor and Banks is one of the many what I call enthusiast led watch brands. The space that you're in, I think, is amusing because it doesn't actually have a clear definition of what these types of brands are. You know, the watch lovers love taxonomy, right? They love categorizing things and putting them in their separate, spaces. This is this type of watch. This is this type of brand. But there's been these terms everywhere from startup to independent, to like online social media brand. What term do you prefer? Yeah, Microbrand. That's, I don't know how I didn't think of that one. What do you prefer as a term? Now that you've been doing this for a couple of years, you sort of have a sense for the business. What out of these terms do you prefer? What do you think actually best defines your category?
That's a good question. I mean, like you said, this comes up all the time. I think for me, it's still a micro brand, and just basically because of the size and scale. You know, we're not these huge, colossal brands with presence all over and different like authorized dealers and things like that. Independent, I guess, is another one. But to me, I think independent would be more of something like that's not owned by a conglomerate, right? They're just kind of making their own thing.
I mean, independent means so much. I mean, it really is a good term, but it's a vague term.
It's a vague term, 100%. So when I explain it to people that are not watch people, I generally say, think about microbrews when that was a thing, when people started making their own beer and there weren't, these huge, that's what we are, but just with watches. And so I micro brand, whatever you want to call it.
Do you agree that every one of the companies that would be included in the microbrand category probably has this one thing in common, where there isn't like a business team who's like, hey, everyone, I have an idea about how to make money. It's an enthusiast. It's someone who begins with the idea of, I like watches. I like the idea of designing my own watch. Maybe I can do that. Do you agree that that's more or less how it starts?
100%. Yes. Most of the folks that I know in the business, including myself, I started in 2012, which at that point, the micro brands, there weren't a lot of us at the time. I started, it wasn't because I, had this, like you said, business and marketing people and all these folks. It was just out of passion, just like most folks that are starting a brand. It's just being a watch nerd is what I say. And that's absolutely that. It's trying to figure it out. There's a lot of things to try to figure out, and generally it's one or two people, and that's what it is. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So 2012, at that time, aBlogtoWatch was 5 years old, so definitely been in the game. But that is prior to, I would say, the current large volume of micro brands out there. That was still sort of a relatively nascent era for that. What inspired you and made you think, you know what, I could do this?
So, it's one of those things where I wasn't, I didn't know a lot of watch people at that time. I started like really getting an interest in watches when right out of high school. I bought a watch. Happened to be a diesel watch at the time, which I still have. And it was pure curiosity at the time that I thought, I love watches. I love design. I love mechanical watches, and just anything like that. So there's not this whole grand story. I just started doing them, started selling them, and then I started learning about these other watch nerds, and that's how I kind of got into that space. But it was just literally passion and curiosity. I mean, that's what it was.
Well, let me get a little bit more granular because I think it's important in this space to distinguish. Let's look at a different vertical. Let's say shoes, okay? Let's say you really like shoes. You're into shoes. You think to yourself, boy, I'd love to have my own shoe brand. I don't know how easy it is to go out there and either make your own shoes or hire some company that specializes in, white label shoemaking. I don't know how available that is, but in watches, that's sort of a thing. What led you to believe that you could, with your resources, make a watch? And what were some of the steps you took to find well, for lack of a better term, a production partner.
Yeah, that's great. Unlike shoes, and I happen to love shoes too, but with watches, before I actually started this idea of creating a brand and trying to design and stuff like that, I was buying parts. It was easy for me to find companies, like Ofray and a couple of these other places that sell parts and movements and dials and hands, where I could just go and buy them. I can go on eBay and buy blanks of things. So you can't really do that with shoes or a couple, I don't know, anything else really that I can think of. But it was easy for me to get started by buying parts that were not branded. And then I found out, all right, how can I get my, logo on something? And I started learning about pad printing. That was the initial start of how that happened. Before I even thought about, overseas, looking for partners in Europe and Asia, all these things. That's how I first got started with that. And at that time, I was really just trying to figure out who makes parts in the United States, watch parts. And as you know, it's slim to none, especially at that time. So that's how I got into that specifically. And then so I started tinkering around, started learning how to assemble. And the way I did that, I found a watchmaker who was willing to kind of help me out, with the basics. And I was messing around with an ETA 6497. So hand-wound basic workhorse movement. So that's how I got into that specific portion of it.
What were you trying to achieve? I think that everyone who likes watches, who tries to build their own, has a vision. They're like, you know what, all the watches out there that I found don't have what I want, or maybe I can't find something I want at a price I can afford. What was that missing thing that you felt that you couldn't find elsewhere, and to have it, you had to make it yourself?
I actually don't have, and I didn't feel that way at all. There's a million watches. You can find something you like. There's plenty of watches that I liked. It was more just like, I just wanted to see what I can make and how that would look. And, with something that I truly found a passion for. I liked a lot of stuff in the past, but nothing got me as interested in like watches did. I mean, I would buy every single magazine, going back to 2002. And so I learned about all these brands and that whole world. And I just was not because I couldn't make a watch that I couldn't find a watch that I liked. I kind of think that is not, I don't know if that's always true when people say that, because there's so many cool watches and so many brands if you're actually looking. So if to me it was just I just wanted to see what I can make. I wanted to see what I'm not a designer by trade. I just have specific tastes, and I just thought that let's see what I can do, and that's how it started. So there was no grand vision. I would say right now it was probably pretty blurred because I just was curious and kind of having fun with it. So that's my answer to that.
Okay, so going back to the conversation, you didn't have a specific, type of watch you wanted that didn't exist. It sounds like it was more curiosity. You wanted to see what goes into these watches, how they're made. Obviously, a lot of us that like watches are just interested in how stuff is assembled, how stuff works. I mean, these are little tools at the end of the day, and there's sort of a little obsession with tools that we all sort of have. What is your background in terms of interests, profession? How did you, what is the sort of accumulation of your skills and your hobbies that led you to say, I want to be a watch brand entrepreneur?
So my background before I decided that I wanted to start a watch brand, was in financial services and technology, basically, but tech in the sales profession, not like I'm any sort of engineer type of stuff. So nothing to do in the design world or anything like that. I've always loved how things were designed, how things were made in general. When we talked about shoes, I love that and what goes into that, and designing shoes. And with watches, there's so many details. And, especially once you start actually looking into do it or designing one, there's so many different parts of it that you have to think about, that when sometimes you look at a simple 3-hand watch, you don't really think that it's hard to design, but there's a lot. So yeah,
devil's in the details, right?
100%. Yes, and the watch enthusiasts know it the best. That's for sure.
I mean, sometimes they don't even know what they're looking for, right? They'll tell if a watch is to their taste or not to their taste. But the funny thing about feedback is that not everybody is trained in how to give good feedback. And I'll jump to that topic.
Yeah.
How do you handle the idea that you want to make stuff for the community, but that the community only has a limited lexicon and intuition on how to give you feedback? I mean, and I guess what I mean is a lot of brands find that they give the community exactly what they want. It doesn't sell.
Yes, that I've learned over the last over 10 years is you can tell when somebody knows or is a watch nerd, right? Just by having a simple conversation. So I've tested this out where I said, okay, I get this feedback a lot. Let's see what happens in it. And it does work sometimes, but most of the time it's kind of like, oh, I'm waiting. It's kind of when people say, hey, I'm waiting for you to get this watch back out. I'm going to buy it as soon as it comes out, right? And you're like, oh man, look at all this demand. And then it actually comes out. And a lot of those folks don't end up actually buying the watch. So, and for whatever reason, but it's kind of the same with the designing and figuring out, just the little details is, I think about it, this is what I like, right? This is my taste, my style. And then I do think about, okay, is this what people are going to like too? Can it be too crazy? And, I don't make watches that are crazy, but, so yeah, it's a really tough, I take the feedback. I generally don't respond or have conversations and feedback that I see on like my Instagram or, people email me all the time. Hey, you should do this, or I wish this had this, or I wish this watch was bigger. Those things you take. Right now I get a lot of, can you make a 36? And I talk to other watch brands who have done a 36, and they're like, it doesn't sell as well as I thought it would because of all the feedback. So, I've been lucky where I've been able to become friends with a lot of brands. And we have, our own little chat groups where we chat and share things and ideas sometimes. And things is specifically like this, like this is a requested get on. Oh, how did the 36? We just talked about this like 2 weeks ago, actually. And it didn't sell as great. So it is hard. It's very hard to, especially when you're not this big company that is able to grab all this data and hire, pay for somebody to go and do all these kind of surveys and people's interests. You just kind of go
market research, right?
Yeah, exactly. You just kind of go with what's been working for you and kind of what you see out there in our enthusiast world. And that's kind of how I guide it a little bit. Yeah.
I want to build on that topic a little bit because I find it fascinating, the camaraderie that you see between the microbrand owners. And it actually, the camaraderie goes up to a pretty well-established brand level. I'm not saying that like Rolex and Patek Philippe are having drinks being like, so what's worked for you? Like at that level, I think some of the exchange of ideas and experiences goes away. But even into the brands that have been doing this for, 20, 30 years and that are, real brands, most of them are independents, obviously not corporate owned. They relish in the ability to get together and compare notes and things like that. And one of the things that I've said is the real value of the major trade shows, the Watches and Wonders of the world, even down to the smaller ones, the wind-ups and things like that I'm sure you go to, is so that people like you can speak to other entrepreneurs and just be like, is your business succeeding? Who are you selling to? What's going on? And that in-person exchange is the only way of doing that because I don't think you guys have a chat group. You know what I mean? Like you have to be in the same room and it's sort of like, well, if you give me some information, I will, share some information with you.
Right.
Share your thoughts on those experiences.
Actually, you know what? For us, for the microbrand world, having these shows like Wind Up, for instance, is how I met most of the folks that I know in the business. When we're at these shows, we don't have a lot of time to speak to each other because we're always behind a booth chatting with people coming to our booth. And then there's always dinners or something afterwards. So it's hard to really sit down and talk business. But it did allow us to start a chat group. We have a chat group. There's a couple of brands that, I speak with almost on a daily basis. And it's talking about ideas, talking about just like we were talking about the 36 millimeter thing, talking about suppliers and stuff like that. What have we seen, or dial makers, where people are going, those kind of things where, as you know, in the watch world is a super secretive thing, especially when you get to the bigger brands. It's really, no one wants to talk about who does what. But going to shows like, EPHJ, for instance, in Geneva, or the Hong Kong Watch and Clock, show, those shows, you'll see other folks there that are in the business, and you get comfortable, and, you kind of make friends, and that's what we've been able to do. And I think it's different from the big brands where, we chat a lot, and we talk about, even not only from a manufacturing standpoint or design standpoint, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this name for a model? But also like, hey, you're doing, ads. I see your ads. How does that work? Is it working? How much does it cost? Those kind of things that usually people don't share. So I've been very fortunate to be able to have these conversations with people who've been in the business, for at least for 10 years, 5 years, or whatever. And it's been really, really helpful for me. So I think it's been great.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a fascinating area. Obviously, it has a limit because at some point,
of course,
brands say, wait a minute, I don't want to help a competitor, because this is an extremely competitive space. So I think it's interesting that on the one hand, there's this acknowledgement that there's no classes, there's no really support or organizations. We're in it together, and I will share information in order to receive information that's valuable to me. So there's obviously value in both exchanging and receiving. But at some point, as you said, the sort of veil gets closed, and you're like, no. I don't want to tell you anymore because I'm afraid you will use my technique, you use my supplier, you'll find some special strategy I have that allows me to reach an audience, produce at a particularly low price point or something like that. Because at the end of the day, I think what's important to tell people, it's not about if you can get it made. It's if you can get it made at a price that enough consumers are willing to spend. It's very easy to go out there and find a company to make you an extremely expensive watch that's not very good. That's super easy to do.
100%, yes.
Right?
I tell people that all the time. I say, especially when I see some of these watches that come out and people are like, oh, like, look at this, can you do something like that? And I always say, look, I can do a lot of things if I had an unlimited budget, right? Like it obviously you have to have some sort of taste and design and kind of be able to do these things. But at the end of the day, you can also hire that out if you wanted to, hire somebody who does actual watch designs. And then you can go to these, big companies that can make you what you want. And it's just going to turn out to be a $50,000 watch, right? and it's just kind of how it works. But it a lot of it is that budgetary, right? So some of the things that we're doing, obviously for us in the microbrand world, our pricing generally is under $2,000, a lot of times under $1,000. And so we try to put a lot into that and be able to sell it. And like you said, it's got to be at a price point where people are going to want to pull the trigger. And so, at some point, the veil, it has to be, you're going to have to, but man, I will say we share quite a bit. And I think one of the nice things about it is that we all make different enough watches that it's, we all have a lot of the same buyers, which is crazy. And it was just really cool too, because, it just shows you how much is out there. And
the community's that supportive,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know people who have 3 watches of people that I know, other brands, and they also have my watch. So it's a really cool thing that we can share those same clients.
Well, let me ask you this. In your time doing this, have there been any brands that used to be more friendly and then have maybe grown and now they're sort of on a different level and they're no longer part of this? Have you seen anybody that has, and again, either it's been an accident or it's what they want to do, but started in the microbrand space and then elevated out of it, and they're into the medium-sized brand space?
I mean, I know a few brands that, from a volume standpoint have jumped, significantly. I'm not sure where they would be as far as like, definitely not at that like Oris or Zodiac level, I would say.
Right.
Christopher Ward, obviously everyone kind of knows they've have been jumping up ever since.
Yeah, but that was never really an enthusiast-driven brand. That was always a business model to begin with.
Yeah, true. But they did get into the enthusiast world pretty
well, from a marketing standpoint, they showed up at the shows and things like that. But like from a brand origination standpoint and all that, completely different. So they knew where to find customers because it was the right price point, but different kind of brand.
But if you're familiar with them too, from when they first started, they were nothing like they are today. So the business model changed at some point. And I mean, I remember when they started and they were making watches that look like other watches.
I mean, lot. I think the most amusing thing for me is when they actually ousted Mr. Christopher Ward, right? So they're still called Christopher Ward. Mr. Christopher Ward is not part. And then he tried to start his own brand. I'm not sure how well that went, but that's sort of some of the strange things that can happen in this industry is that people start a brand and then they're ousted from their own brand. And then they go start another brand because legally they can't use their own name anymore. That happens a lot of the time.
Yeah, you're right. But yeah, other than that, the brands that I know that have jumped significantly since, I've known them in volume, I will say, still feel very much like a micro brand. But I know that what their production level is getting to a different level. And you can see it, in the marketing or whatever they're doing. And, but they still so far have kept it, I feel that they have kept it pretty personal. So it still has that same feel as like, hey, we're still a micro brand. So
I want to talk a little bit about the consumer who I find very, very fascinating. We could have many, many shows just about this topic. But one of the things that I firmly believe is that the micro brand industry exists because there's this gap in the market at particular price points. And sort of, you mentioned, $2,000 and under, so we'll use that amount. I would say that at under $2,000, while there today are actually a lot more options, 10 years ago, even sort of adjusted for inflation and things like that, the mainstream brands didn't have a lot to offer. And so if you were getting into this hobby and you wanted to sample different types of styles, colors, shapes, movements, and things like that, going the established brand route was a very expensive way of doing so. And the micro brand route seemed to offer a lot more. And I continue to believe that the industry and that category exists because the mainstream brands, for whatever reason, have either abandoned or dismissed certain price points. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was one of those folks, it's at some point when I was buying, and I still buy watches today. But if you wanted to get into watches, under, let's say, 1,000, in the past, like you said, you'd have to go to the Tussauds or the, Victorinox Swiss Armies and those kind of brands that you would find at a jewelry store, Citizen, things like that, even Seiko. But it has now, there's so many options. And I think those other bigger brands, I don't know if they're doing it just because, hey, we don't want to be in this price point because it's not luxury enough or whatever they're trying to get to. But yeah, I totally agree with that.
That's actually quite interesting. And of course, we've seen a lot of the bigger brands notice, I'll just call it the consumer fervor, because there really has been the amount of people to go to these events and the interest around it. And now they've tried to participate. And I'm glad you mentioned Tissot because, again, 10 years ago, Tissot did not have much the enthusiast, right, would want at that price point. And then they, with the PRX, other companies have had their own things. Do you think that there's a chance that if the big companies got in at these price points, it would eliminate a lot of market share? Or is there still something about the personality, the design, the flexibility, the ethos that they still can't really replicate? That there's sort of that, like you were talking about microbrew, it seems like there's just a bunch of, just people that love this thing. Is there something about this space that a corporate or larger interest simply can't do because they lack the authenticity?
100%. I think that's spot on, is that they can obviously make a watch in our price points and they can hire a bunch of designers market it way better than, we can. But at the end of the day, you can't go to a show, even if it's Tissot or any of these brands, and talk to the person who founded it, right? And the person who you're emailing with or answering your DM messages, usually that's who you're talking to when you go to these shows. And that personal touch and relationship that you kind of establish with your buyer, you will not find that with Tissot or any of those kind of, big brands. And there's nothing against Tissot. I purchased Tissot's when I was at that price point in my life a long time ago. But yeah, I think that's the main factor. It's just they have access to the founders, right? And the people that are doing this and are just as nerdy about watches as they are, where usually with the bigger brands, it's a lot of times, you could go walk into an AD and a lot of times the people behind the desk don't know that much about watches. So we bring that to the table, I think, as a micro brand where we can talk watches, obviously, and people can see genuinely, hey, if you're a watch guy, and I don't think the big brands can replicate that.
Let me expand on that a little bit because it's a point that I find really, really fascinating. It's something that really impressed me because I'm a different type of consumer. I'm the type of consumer that likes the product, right? I really hyper focus on the design, as interesting as originals of a high quality. But I recognize over the years that I represent a relatively small number of people who has that obsessive eye for detail. Most consumers, no ding on them. They're not wired to basically evaluate this watch is prettier than this watch or is better than this watch. And with the micro brands, I think what a lot of people are buying is that interaction with what I'll call the artist, right? Like, yes, you're the founder and maybe you don't draw with pencil and pen, but you sort of are the artist.
Yeah.
You are the artist and this is your art and they want to connect with you. And if they connect with you, they think that this watch represents shared values and they wear it for reasons that are beyond, I adore this design. It's the perfect watch. There's none better at a cheaper price. Like, it's not so much an evaluation of the tool as much as the watch represents a certain amount of values. And for that reason, the micro brand industry is as big or can be as big as there are different personalities, as opposed to, are there enough original designs? Are there that many different variations of watches people want? The answer is no, but what they want is a variety of people to buy watches from.
I agree with that 100%. It's even when I buy a watch from, other micro brands, and I do, and I don't get them for free or anything like that. I actually buy watches from other micro brands that I like, and I keep those watches most of the time because of that relationship, or because I know this person, or I've met that person, and it is part of the whole experience. And that's why I think our space right now, even though now there's a lot of micro brands, I always feel like there's something fresh or some cool design. And I'm like you, I think the mechanics are cool. I know I love a micro rotor. It's one of my favorite types of movements. But first thing is, how does it look? Does it attract my eye? And I think that's with a lot of things. There are people who are just very technical and that's what they want, but that's not me either. Do I like the way it looks is kind of my first thing. And if I do, then I dig into the details more and see if it's something I want to purchase. And that's kind of one of those things where I think our world, a lot of people are like that.
I want to talk about what I call manufacturing sustainability for a moment. I have theorized for a while that we are living in a wonderful golden age where this type of micro brand entrepreneurship is available. And by that, I mean there are these manufacturing resources out there that can produce, again, if you know what you want, you have the right relationships at the right price, allowing you to make a very competent timepiece at an affordable price point. My theory is that over time, this manufacturing capacity will diminish because a lot of it is a leftover vestige from, we'll call them fashion brands or bigger brands, putting in huge orders of tens of thousands or 100,000s of pieces. And now a micro brand, you're not making 100,000 watches a year. You're making hundreds maybe or something like that. The order sizes are smaller. So I just want to ask your opinion on if you think this manufacturing infrastructure is durable enough to sustain 2, 3, 4 decades, or perhaps over time it will erode away as we move further away from the sort of 20th century where this stuff was made as sort of a tool. And I just sort of want to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, it'll always be there, but it's quite larger now than I think is really sustainable given the manufacturing need and output. I love your thoughts on this.
I've thought a little bit. Like I said, I've thought about this before, and I actually just had a conversation about this, even with my manufacturer, and with other guys in our group as well, as far as manufacturing and places to go and things like that. Funny, and as of right now, I go, how are the factories doing? This is what I asked my manufacturer, because it's been, since COVID, a lot of the factories have been, they don't have as many workers. Right. So lead times are much longer than they used to be.
Interesting.
And it hasn't come back yet. They're not full capacity still. Even the large brands that are putting in these orders have cut down on their orders too. So I think that we're filling a space for these manufacturers that were probably making a lot for these bigger brands. And now that those have cut back, you still have the smaller guys, as you mentioned, where whether you're making 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 a year, whatever you're making, the volume is getting there, I think, where there's enough brands, not enough, I don't know if it's enough, but there's a lot of brands right now that are producing and are doing well. And the trajectory seems to be going this way, which generally means making more production. So yeah, I don't know if it's something that it's going to go away. It was a little scary when the lead time started getting longer because the factories didn't have as many workers. The scary part is, okay, what do we do now? Let's find other manufacturers, so that we're not just relying on one. So you kind of work around that. But it is a concern a little bit right now just because of that. But, I think it's going to be one of those things where we just have to start kind of planning and pivot if we can. But it's difficult to find good manufacturing partners. So as you know, most of the manufacturing is, even for Swiss brands, is done in Asia. And, during COVID, I think that became more prevalent you saw brands that all of a sudden started slowing down, and you're like, well, this is a Swiss made brand. Why is that slowing down? So it's because of these things. So yeah, I try not to think too gloomy about it, but I'm hoping, I'm positive, and I'm hoping that it just, keeps going the way it's been going.
Yeah. Thank you for that insight. I mean, I think we agree that there's a lot of unknowns. Yeah. But it's also a very serious topic because this entire exercise in entrepreneurialism is moot if you can't get the stuff made at an affordable price. You and I have both been to the Hong Kong Watch and Clock Fair. I think that's a wonderful example because 10 years ago, that was a relatively accessible place to go. They wanted you to go there. You could literally go up and within a few minutes decide if you wanted to work with someone. You could meet suppliers that, frankly, it's not that you couldn't meet them when it wasn't in person, but like you've seen those like lists of suppliers. It's just like a bunch of industrial names. It's like, what are you going to do? Start cold calling and hope that someone speaks English? Like it's a disaster. You have to go there. Now, the world is much more closed. Going to Hong Kong is not as feasible a thing. Either it's inaccessible or you don't want to. Yep. It's not the same city and things like that. And so there is a shrinkage. You and others who are sort of grandfathered in, you already have the relationship, that's good. People that are just trying to do this now have a lot of different sets of challenges. Yeah, you could use LinkedIn, but you have no idea who's good. Many of them are, I don't want to say cheat you, but not exactly treat you right. They want to charge, they want to make money. Yeah. And it is important to sit there and say, without this industrial base of being able to make these things, this wonderful, blossoming, evolutionary kind of ecosystem of brands, doesn't necessarily exist. So what I'm hearing, there's no immediate emergencies, but there haven't really been a full rebound after the COVID crunch. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily clear how much it will be able to expand. And that's what I'm sort of thinking right now. People who are in it will remain in it, but I don't know how many new ones will pop up. And as you alluded to earlier, and I think this is the other interesting topic, getting this stuff made in the United States or in small batches, in other ways, seems like a good idea. From the outside, you can't tell why you couldn't do it, but practically speaking, you really can't. If you want to make a watch almost at any price point, unless it's super, super high-end, Swiss, craftsmanship, blah, 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 you have to go to Asia, and you're reliant on that industrialization, right?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I searched and searched and searched, when I was looking, this is, prior to 2012, for a long time. And I was like, man, there's no one making cases. There's no dial makers, hand makers. At that time, the only person that I knew, I didn't know them, but a brand that I knew was RGM, right? That they were making some of their parts, some of the movements, things like that. And so when I learned that, then it's, I thought by 2024, which is now, that there would be a bigger, there'd be more people making, watch parts in the US. And there's some that have popped up, but then you're limited to design, right? It's like, all right, I can make this. This is the most basic kind of case I can make, or the most basic kind of dial that I can make. And so it's really difficult, and it's just extremely expensive. You have to have, if you're going to CNC a case and things like that, not only do you have to know how to design it in your CAD and all these other things, but also machine it, have a CNC machine, which is very expensive, and have somebody who knows how to run that CNC machine properly is also expensive. So then you have a lot more overhead to be able to create something of value, or that people, not of value, but that people are going to be able to want to buy as a newer brand. It's, you mentioned, for newer people are trying to get into this, and I don't know how I read. I still today get a ton of emails from different manufacturers that are trying to get me to, have them make the parts
we'll
for
sell
us.
You crystals, we'll sell you straps, we'll sell you cases, right?
So I don't know. It's like, hey, I think it's a good thing, because that means that, hey, we're growing and we're looking for other, people to come and, have us as their partner. Or is it, we don't have any, so we need more. We're trying to find more business. I don't know, but I get hit up every day, by email all the time. So, I think, I do too. And I'm not a watch brand entrepreneur. I get these messages on a weekly basis on LinkedIn or email. Yeah. We are a supplier. They don't check that I have no business in that, but it is sent out. I'm going to try to answer a question that I think is important. Is why are there not enough places in America that can make this stuff? It's not that we can't. It's I think a lot of companies choose not to. And do you remember the Timex American Documents series of watches? I don't think I don't.
Sure.
Maybe I saw one. I would.
No, I'll remind you. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, Timex, American company, said, you know what? Wouldn't it be cool if we made a watch in America again? Right? Because for a long time, the majority of their manufacturers in the Philippines. Of course, they have Swiss-made products. But the bottom line is there aren't Timex watches made in America, and they thought they would create this concept called American Documents. They already from the beginning decided we're not going to make the movement here. Right? They already gave up on that. Yeah. These were I'm not even sure if they still sell them, but they were really cool. They had Swiss quartz movements in there. Yeah. But they said aside from the movement, we want to make every part of this watch in the United States. So we're talking the strap, case, dial, hands, crown, and in the box. And they hired aBlogtoWatch and my team to create a bit of a documentary about this. And what we did is we went out to the East Coast and we visited not all the suppliers, but a fair number of them. And one of the things that became like abundantly clear was that the sort of small little cosmetic details that are required to make a watch part pretty, like the polishing or an edge or a shape or something like that, was so annoying to them, right? Because they weren't used to that it didn't make sense from a financial perspective. They're like, wait a minute. You want this much time and effort per part, and you're only ordering this many parts? Well, I got this client over here that wants 200,000 of something, and they don't need anywhere close to the detail that you need. So from a financial perspective, I'm either going to charge you a crazy amount, or I'm just not interested in this because financially it means nothing for me. And so what Timex found, it was so difficult, even with their resources, to locate suppliers that that had the desire to do it. And they literally had to go to people and be like, oh, but we'll give you some watches. Won't this be cool? Your factory members will be able to wear it. And they were like trying to like schmooze and be like, oh, come on. And they did. And a lot of the things that they end up making were great, but they couldn't talk a lot about where they got them made from because a lot of politically sensitive manufacturers like weapons suppliers and stuff like that. And no one wants to think that like the watch case was made next to like bullet casings or something like that. But like, those are the companies that could do, little metal parts in enough detail. There just wasn't an infrastructure for it. And Timex tried more than anyone else. They have way more resources and especially human resources than any micro brand. They can send people out to factories. They have a big corporate name that they can attach with this proposal. Someone like yourself or any of these other micro brands, you couldn't go to a manufacturer and be like, hey, stop everything and make me something in incredibly high detail. And I only want 100 parts. Like that could never happen. And so that's probably the main reason why these types of parts cannot be made in the United States. And I will end by saying that the most difficult parts to make in terms of specialization are the hands and dials, which are really what give the watch the personality. Yes, people say it's the movement and the case and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's the hands and dials, which you need to have correct. And that requires not just the most specialized type of company, but the relationship so that they will do it in a way where it doesn't look just god-awful horrible. Agree, disagree?
100%. And I went to some a couple of machining, companies here in Illinois, and I said, okay, I'm going to design a case because I was like, if I can just make the case, I'll be happy with that. I found one that was willing to talk to me. To your point,
oh, nice.
It's like that they were like, no. First question: how many pieces? 50, 100? They're like, no thanks. And I had one where I sent them the file. I don't know if they were being nice to me or not. I actually went there, saw the different parts that they were making, and I said, look at this. It's very kind of similar to this that you're making already, out of steel and all this.
Right.
And he's like, all right, send us the file and we'll get back to you. I sent them the file. They were nice enough to get back to me. And they said, I can't make what you sent, but we can make this, and basically change the design of the case. But it still looked like a watch case. And they're like, yeah, it's going to be, I think it was going to be about $200 a case, which is a lot. And that was just for the middle case. It wasn't for a bezel. It wasn't for the case back. That was a whole different part. So to your point, that's 100%. It's just hard. It's tedious. You really have to specialize in making these kind of fine detailed machining. And also because there's not a lot of manufacturing, obviously, in the U.S. As much from a machining standpoint as there used to be. But yeah, 100%. There's a lot of them just didn't even bother replying to me. So, and it's because of that. So, yeah.
I want to compare that a little bit with the experience in Switzerland, right? Mm-hmm. Where a lot of these companies are. There's a lot of specialist hand and dial makers there. And while you have more access there, the situation isn't perfect. And what I mean by that is, in order to get these suppliers to do the work for you, you have to become their buddy. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the Swiss brands that are there, they spend a lot of their time just going around servicing suppliers, like checking in, bringing them like cake and being like, hey guys, you think you can get around to making this? Or can I incentivize you to actually do this polish right? Like, it's not like sending the specs and then just assuming they're going to make it. There's a lot of relationship polishing and massaging that has to happen. You have to just like show them your vision, like, oh guys, but if you just help me next year, I'll be able to sell more watches and order more. Like, it's a lot of convincing and schmoozing and relationship building, even amongst neighbors in Switzerland. To expect that someone from the United States or another country would be able to foster that and nurture that type of relationship with suppliers in Switzerland is unreasonable, because you're not there and you can't sit there and drive around all the time. I mean, the brands spend an enormous amount of time literally just checking in with the suppliers. And that is a huge part of this. And I think that that's important to say that even in Switzerland, where arguably the quality can be the highest, it's not so straightforward.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And, I went to Basel one year. I've met a few folks from movement manufacturers and then I just, would try to meet different people. I remember talking to this one gentleman who had worked for the movement companies, a bunch of different ones. And I'm not going to say any names or anything, but in speaking with him, he divulged a lot of information that I had no clue about, right? And some of it was like, yes, this movement manufacturer is Swiss and they're Swiss made. It doesn't mean every single part of that movement is made in Switzerland. So there's a lot of this going on over there. And I can imagine that, if I go to a Swiss manufacturer, it's not like they're sitting there, oh, yes, please give me your business, right? It's like I have to sell them to work with me. So it's usually not that way, right? It's almost like Rolex, like, hey, I want to go to the AD. I have to like literally beg them to give me a GMT or something like that, which is crazy to think about, that I want to go spend $13,000 and I can't. I have to beg them for it. And I think that it's in Switzerland, from the little experience and that I have in talking to folks over there and different manufacturers, it's like like you said, they don't know me. They're like, I don't know who you are. They don't care. And it's just getting those relationships and becoming buddy with them and be able to help you. So it's very different.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. There's also, unfortunately, a protectionist element to it, where it's not that they won't make stuff for you, but they don't ever want to give a new, smaller foreign brand the ability to sell a better product at a lower price than their big clients in Switzerland. There is this idea that we want to protect the ability for these clients to sell a certain quality, a certain price point. So it's not that they'll say no to you, but they will make you spend so much money on the manufacturing that the amount of money left to charge for your watch is so high, there is zero ability to compete in the landscape. And that's why it's almost sort of a confidence game of like, oh, I'm just a poor watchmaker, charge me the lowest amount because I can't afford more. Because if they sniff money, they're like, oh, well, we're just going to charge more. And again, that's frustrating the purpose of working with a supplier, because the goal is to produce something where you can, multiply that a little bit and sell at a profit and be a company. They're not set up to allow you to run a watch business. They're set up to help you make something at a price they want to charge without any concern for what the end retail price needs to be.
Yes, and I've had that experience because I've reached out to some of these companies in Switzerland that make watches for folks, and the tooling cost is, just to your point, they don't care. They're just like, okay, yeah, you want to make it here, you want to work with us, this is what it's going to cost. Just the tooling part alone is really, really high, and which again, that's going to have to go back into your end price, which you cannot make a watch that's going to be $600, $700. You're gonna have to be up in that closer to $2,000 or $1,500 range if you're selling direct to consumer. So yeah, it's really, really expensive to really go and work with those folks.
So let's shift the conversation, talk about price points while we're sort of on this. I don't know the full range of your price points. If you look on your website, again, this is sort of under $1,000. Some of these closer to $500 is the price point we're at. My question is, A, is this the price point you started with, or have you sort of evolved to it? And then B, what types of price points do you want to normalize at? Are you happy where you are right now? Is it still a moving target? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So no, when I first started, because I was only using hand wound, ETA 6497s, which are not that cheap. I started around that 1,000 to 2,000. But you were able to kind of semi-customize the watch when I first started doing this. But then from there, it all, for me, when I tell folks, it's not that I'm trying to be, at 600 or right now in that range. It's just all dependent on the movement of where my price is going to be. And I think now people understand that more, especially in the enthusiast world. But yeah, I think if I can offer something that feels like, that's my $700 watch today, that feels maybe like it could be a $1,200 watch, but it's not. I think that's kind of what I like, and I try to execute. But for instance, the new model I'm working on is going to have a Swiss movement versus the 42 that's on my website now uses a Miyota movement. And the price difference is huge, right? My dial and everything else doesn't cost that much more because I'm using a more expensive movement. It's just the movement cost, which then drives my price up. So, I'll have a watch that's over $1,000 and it's simply based on the movement, not because I'm trying to, be at a higher price point. I think the price point that I'm at now, between that $600 to $1,500, is kind of where I want to be in a range, and then that will just be dependent on the movement for the most part. But.
And what about with the consumer? Do you see changes in what they're willing to spend? Are they seemingly interested in spending more for a better product? Is it still sort of a race to the bottom in a lot where they're trying to see how little they can spend? Talk a little bit about how you've seen changes in that type of behavior.
I think actually I did feel like that at one point, where it was kind of like a race to the bottom, and brands out there that were, charging a really low pricing for what they were selling. And I don't, maybe it's just their business strategy. I don't know. But I think today, I feel more comfortable being able to sell or have a watch that, let's say, costs $1,300 because it has certain specs to it, and people understand that that's why that watch is at that price point. So they're very educated now when it comes because of sites like yours and forums and meeting up with other folks. Of if I was charging $1,000 for a Miyota based watch, they would kill me, right? They'd be like, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. So you have to be cognizant of all that. And so, I think they're willing to pay more. I've seen brands that are over $1,000 that weren't traditionally over $1,000, and it's and I see them being successful. So I do think people are willing to spend a little bit more if you have the right specs on it. That says, okay, I understand why that's more money.
Do you find that a lot of the customers are migratory? And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. Or once they sort of find you, they're buying again and again and again. By migratory, I mean they're still trying to figure out who they are and where they want to buy a price point. They see that you have a design, they're interested in a price point, they get it, and then maybe they move on elsewhere, as opposed to people that become loyalists. Explain a little bit about how you see those two types of customers as relating to Astor and Banks.
Yeah, I see both. And I see people who come back, of course, which is always great. Sometimes they come back for the same watch in a different color, which is great. But you do see those folks that do migrate. Either they just go somewhere else because I don't have enough product or I don't have anything else they like, which you see. And it's true to my case right now. But I also see them moving to different price points. So I could be a great starter watch, and I've seen that where they start with a watch like mine in my price point, and then they kind of go up a little bit higher, then they get up a little bit higher. So it just depends on where you catch them in their watch journey. I mean, I remember spending $200, and that's a lot of money. Then $500, then $1,000, then $3,000, and it just goes up, and then. When I spend $3,000 and then I see a watch that I like that's only $500, even though it's $500, it's still a lot of money. I'm like, oh, that's not that bad. So yeah, I see both of those kind of customers that they just kind of grow out and want the bigger names after they get introduced with a microbrand. And then I see the ones that are just in that microbrand space because that's where their price point, they feel comfortable. They feel that they're getting a lot of value for the watch. So yeah, both of those I've definitely have seen that come to me over the last 10 years.
Thank you for that explanation. I guess I'm curious because I always like thinking long term. I guess that's part of my value of this industry is I tend to see things out over many years as opposed to what'll happen in the next few months. And I've actually been quite correct in a lot of my assessments of things like that. But one of the things I see about a brand like Astor and Banks and others is there's this big question of how do you sustainably do business in the long term? On the one hand, you have to keep creating novelty. What that means is just new products for people to be excited about. On the other hand, you also have to continue to create relationships and marketing and things like that. And you want to believe that you have a model where like, if I do this, people will come and buy a new watch each year. I remember years ago, I was having an interview with Jean-Claude Biver when he was at Hublot. And he said to me that according to their data, the kind of core consumer that he wanted to focus on, and this actually surprised me, bought 7 Hublots a year. Wow, I was like, wow, 7 Hublots a year. And that's why they came out with so many, because they knew not everyone was going to buy every model.
Wow.
But if they gave them enough variety, those Hublotistas, as they called them, would buy a lot. Obviously, most brands couldn't be as prolific as them.
Right.
But they had this idea that we want to develop a relationship with a customer who's going to keep giving us money, which is a very different concept. Is we know that we're going to sell 2 or 3 watches or maybe just one, and then we need to invest our effort in finding a brand new customer. And maybe that customer is a fresh watch lover or someone who is tired with X or Y or whatever. And so my question for you is, how do you split your time between fleshing out the collection and making sure that there's reason for people to come back and doing that initial marketing and customer capture to get at least that one sale? You know what I mean? Tell me about how you personally segment your time between these two very different but important tasks.
Yeah, I will be the first one to say that I'm terrible at marketing because
says the sales guy.
yeah, and there's a lot of things that we need to do, or I need to do as part of getting to where I can keep people interested, right? And one of those is having more SKUs, different models, not just different. The different colors works great because you do get people that come and buy the different colors. They'll buy 2 or 3 or whatever, which is great, and they come back. Having more models and being able to kind of have that kind of same design cohesiveness that people like, that you kind of found, which I feel very comfortable with now. But the marketing portion of it is another aspect of it that it's going to be a much more concentration this year and next year, because we'll have more models by the end of the year. And now we have to figure out how we're going to sell these watches, of course. And doing the shows is great, but really figuring out our customers, what they like, getting more data, as kind of what you were talking about. I couldn't tell you, specifically how many people have bought the same model. And unless I really dig into it, I don't know. I should know that, right? So I'm trying to get better at that, better at marketing, better at doing things so that people can come back and still have that same exciting feeling that they have. The reviews and emails that I get and messages from people who buy the watch are really, really great. So it makes me feel very confident in what I'm doing, but there's a lot that I need to work on. And that's 100% one of the things is the marketing, so that I can keep people interested and find new people, of course, and really figure out what people are, how are they going to why do they want to come back to me, and that's not an easy question to answer.
If you had more money and resources, what would you do with it? You obviously talked about marketing, but specifically, if you're able to increase your profits by 30%. Do you know where that money would go into? Would you try to figure it out? I'm just curious if you have a plan and just need the money, or like some entrepreneurs in this space, even if they had double the money, they're not really quite sure what they would do with it.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the middle. I definitely know that part of that money, it does need to go to marketing and advertising, because it's something that, especially the ad part, now that I feel more comfortable in speaking with other folks, it's something that I was never comfortable with, because I just didn't know enough. I didn't know if it would work, things like that. And then the second part of that would be a new product. That's where I would be spending my money, is those two things: new product and marketing and advertising. As of right now,
that's interesting. So yeah. I think as a takeaway message from this, what I want to say is that when you are a small brand or even a big brand, you can market yourself in terms of creating buzz about the brand, videos, pictures, things like that. You can do the hard work, but that's sometimes, it's always expensive. It's always hard. Yes. But sometimes what you can do is just come out with a brand new product, and that at least temporarily gets attention. And so there's this struggle between, do I just put money into the new product, which temporarily gets me some money, but may not build my brand? Mm-hmm. Or do I do a bunch of vague brand building marketing exercises? I'm not really sure, because it's a bottomless pit of money, right? You can put an endless amount of money in marketing. There's no limits to it. Yeah. And and that explains why you actually have brands put more effort into a new product as opposed to embellish their brand, build upon it, create more reasons to get the same watch. I mean, you look at Rolex, for example, that puts a huge amount of effort into the same collection. They are brand building as opposed to the sort of easier idea of just keeping and make novelty. Rolex would come out with all kinds of weird watches and probably sell well. But they said, no. We want to more focus on the brand. So obviously the brand building size or side of the strategy is better in the long run, but it is more complicated, much more expensive, slower, right? Mm-hmm. The speed is a big part. So what I'm hearing from you is that one of the reasons there's so many new models all the time is it sort of seems to be a replacement for having to do a lot of marketing and brand building. And as long as that works, we'll probably still see a very prolific amount of new watches all the time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think especially with the microbrand folks, who don't have generally deep pockets to spend money on both, it's you hit it right on the nail when you said bringing out a new model or a new watch is you get, attention when you bring it out. And that's kind of a replacement instead of putting that money into more ads or whatever it is. Now, today, I feel very lucky that people are still buying my watches, even though I don't do ads and things like that. But I have been slow and steady is kind of my thing with this. I mean, this is it's not making me rich, right? And it's my passion project, and I just want to be able to do it what I think is right. And I think right now where we're going is, and it's going to be hard, is figuring out, all right, how much do we spend here? Because I can't spend on both the same. I have to have product. So I don't want to spend on ads because I don't have enough product to, if I spend on ads and there's no product, obviously that's not a good idea. So I need to have product and then get, people to come and see and buy the watch. So and that's where we're going right now.
Andrew, we're almost out of time, and I sort of have one more big question to ask you. Over the next 12 to 24 months, what are you the most excited about, and what are you the most worried about? Of course, in the context of the running Astor and Banks.
I'm most excited about the new models that we're going to be coming out. One of them, as I mentioned, is part of the Sea Ranger line, which is coming out next month. And then I have the Sea Ranger. The first model is coming out in the fall, which is coming back, which is great. But so that's where my concentration is on that. Obviously, the worry is, are people going to still want those, want the product? And so I just have to really plan to make sure I do it right. And that's kind of where my head is at right now is we need product, make sure the product is right or what we think is right, and then execute on getting people to come to us.
Well, I have to endorse that mentality of what I'll call it product centrism, because that's what you want from a micro brand. You really want the person in charge to be mostly focused on the product being great. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, and they don't necessarily have the best products, but that in an ideal sense is what you want to do. Andrew, this has been great. Please tell the audience where they can learn more about you and the Astor and Banks brand on the internet.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. You can go to Astor and Banks on Instagram. It's just at Astor and Banks. And my website is astorandbanks.com.
This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with Andrew Perez of Astor and Banks. Andrew, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ariel. It was a pleasure, and I really enjoyed our conversation.